You're talking about treason, about corruption in the territorial government? Those are serious accusations. Marshal Benedict Thorne snarled, his face contorting with a mixture of disbelief and growing fear. His hand had instinctively moved to his pistol, then paused, trembling ever so slightly. "And they'll remain accusations until I can prove them," Kael replied, his voice steady despite the pain etched across his face, pushing himself up straighter against the well. "Which is why they need me dead before I reach the Apache Council tomorrow. Why they put a bullet in me and left me for dead. Why they're counting on men like you to finish what they started." Elias watched this exchange with a mounting sense of dread. He had thought he was just helping a wounded stranger. Instead, he'd stumbled into the middle of a conspiracy that could tear the entire territory apart. But what chilled him most was the realization that if Kael was telling the truth, then Marshal Thorne hadn't come here to arrest a fugitive. He'd come here to commit murder. The silence stretched like a taut rope about to snap. Thorne's 5 men shifted nervously in their saddles, hands hovering near their weapons, eyes darting between their marshal and the wounded Apache, who had just accused half the territorial government of murder and treason. Elias could see the war happening behind Thorne's eyes. The marshal was trapped between duty and truth, between orders and conscience. And men like Thorne didn't handle moral dilemmas well. They usually solved them with bullets. "Even if what you're saying is true," Thorne said slowly, his voice laced with venom, "I have my orders. You're wanted for Miller's murder. I'm supposed to bring you back dead or alive." "Dead would be more convenient," Kael replied, his voice unwavering. "Dead men can't testify. Dead men can't reveal who really benefits from another Indian war." One of Thorne's men, a young deputy with nervous eyes named Bradley, leaned forward in his saddle. "Marshal, if he's telling the truth about the peace treaty—" "Shut up, Bradley," Thorne snapped, his eyes flashing. But Elias could see doubt creeping into the marshal's expression like cracks in a damn wall. That's when Kael played his final, unexpected card. Reaching into a leather pouch at his belt with trembling fingers, he pulled out a folded piece of paper stained with his own blood. "This is why they tried to kill me. A letter from Colonel Miller, written the night before he died." Thorne stared at the letter like it might burst into flames. "What does it say?" he demanded, his voice a strained whisper. "It says Miller discovered who's been supplying weapons to the renegade tribes. Names, dates, amounts. Enough evidence to hang a dozen men, including evidence that someone in the territorial marshal's office has been taking bribes to look the other way." The words hit Thorne like a physical blow. His face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green. Behind him, his men exchanged nervous glances, suddenly very interested in examining their horses' manes. Elias felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He was witnessing something that could get them all killed. The moment when a corrupt lawman realized his own neck was on the chopping block. "You are lying," Thorne said, but his voice lacked conviction, a hollow sound against the vastness of the prairie. "Am I?" Kael held up the letter, the bloodstains a stark reminder of his ordeal. "Miller trusted me enough to give me this the night he died, told me to get it to Fort Liberty if anything happened to him, said it was insurance."
Thorne took a step forward, his hand now gripping his pistol with white knuckles. "Give me that letter so you can destroy it." Kael shook his head slowly. "I don't think so, Marshal. But I'll make you a deal. Let me live long enough to reach the Apache Council tomorrow, and I'll make sure your name isn't mentioned when this all comes to light." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Elias could see Thorne calculating the odds, weighing the risks, trying to figure out which choice would keep him alive longer. His pale blue eyes darted from Kael to the letter, then to his shifting deputies. But what happened next surprised everyone. Deputy Bradley dismounted, his hands raised peacefully, and walked slowly toward the well. "Marshal, I've been thinking about something. Remember that shipment of rifles that went missing 3 months ago? The one we were told was stolen by Indians? Thorne's face darkened further. What about it? I saw those same rifles 2 weeks later in the hands of settlers heading south, Bradley continued, his young face flushed with either courage or fear. Made me wonder who was really stealing from whom. The admission cracked something open in the group. Suddenly, other deputies were nodding, sharing glances, remembering things that hadn't made sense at the time. Elias realized that Cale had just done something remarkable. Without firing a shot or raising his voice, he had turned Thorne's own men against him. The foundation of Thorne's corrupt authority was crumbling, piece by painful piece. But Thorne wasn't the kind of man who went down without a fight, and when cornered, dangerous men did dangerous things. Thorne's hand tightened on his pistol grip until his knuckles went white. A cornered animal was always the most dangerous, and Elias could see the exact moment when the marshal decided that bullets were simpler than truth. "You're all fools," Thorne snarled, his mask of civility finally slipping away, revealing the raw, vicious man beneath. "You think this savage's word means anything against mine? You think anyone will believe the testimony of a dead Indian and a handful of traitors?" The deputies spread out instinctively, hands moving toward their weapons, but Elias could see the uncertainty in their faces. Years of following orders warred against the growing realization that those orders might be profoundly wrong. Cale struggled to his feet, using the stone well for support. Blood seeped through his fingers where he pressed them against his wound, but his voice remained steady, a beacon of defiance in the tense air. "The truth doesn't care who speaks it, Marshal. It just is." "The truth," Thorne spat, pulling his pistol in one smooth, deadly motion, the barrel swinging toward Cale, "is that you murdered a United States Army officer, and I'm going to collect the bounty on your head."
But before he could fire, Deputy Bradley stepped directly into the line of fire, his own weapon raised. "Stand down, Marshal!" The words cracked like thunder across the ranch. 4 other deputies followed Bradley's lead, their guns trained on their own commanding officer. Only one man remained loyal to Thorne, a grizzled veteran named Hawkins who looked as corrupt as his boss. "You're making a mistake, boys," Thorne said, though sweat now beaded on his forehead. "A mistake that'll cost you your badges, maybe your lives." "Maybe," Bradley replied, his voice firm. "But I have made enough mistakes following your orders. I won't make any more." Elias watched this standoff with growing dread. 6 armed men in his ranch yard, all pointing guns at each other, all convinced they were in the right. This was how range wars started. This was how good men died for bad reasons. That's when Cale did something truly unexpected. He began to sing, not in English, but in Apache, a low, haunting melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The ancient words carried across the ranch like wind through canyon walls, speaking of honor and sacrifice, of brothers who stood together against the darkness. The effect was immediate and startling. The deputies lowered their weapons slightly, not understanding the words, but feeling their power, their raw emotion. Even Thorne seemed momentarily mesmerized by the sound, his gun hand wavering. And while they listened, transfixed, Cale was doing something else entirely. He was calling to his people. The song was a signal, a message carried on the evening wind to ears that knew how to listen. Elias realized this with a chill that ran down his spine like ice water. Cale wasn't just singing, he was summoning. The melody ended, and silence fell over the ranch like a heavy blanket. But in that silence, Elias heard something that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, distant but growing closer. Many hoofbeats, moving fast. Twice Thorne heard them too. His face went pale as moonlight. "How many?" he rasped. Cale smiled, despite his pain. A grim, knowing smile. "Enough." The sound grew louder, multiplying until it sounded like thunder rolling across the plains. Not 6 riders this time, not even a dozen. An entire Apache war party was riding toward Elias's ranch, and they would arrive within minutes. Thorne raised his pistol again, this time pointing it directly at Elias's chest. You did this. You helped him signal them." "I gave a dying man water," Elias replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Same as I do for any creature suffering on my land." The hoofbeats were close enough now to feel in the ground beneath their feet, close enough to count, too many to count, and Thorn finally understood what Kael had been planning all along. They came over the horizon like a vision from another world. 50 Apache warriors on horseback, moving in perfect formation, their war paint gleaming in the dying sunlight. But as they drew closer, Elias realized something that defied everything he thought he knew about Indian war parties. They weren't coming for battle. At the head of the group rode an elderly chief whose presence commanded respect from 100 yards away. His gray hair was braided with eagle feathers, and despite his age, he sat his horse with the dignity of a man who had never bowed to anyone. Behind him rode warriors of every age, from seasoned fighters to young braves barely old enough to carry weapons. But their weapons remained sheathed. Thorn's face cycled through confusion, fear, and desperate calculation. He still held his pistol trained on Elias, but his hand shook like a man with a fever. "This changes nothing. I still have my orders." "Your orders," came a new voice, clear and authoritative, "are no longer valid." Everyone turned to see Deputy Bradley holding up an official-looking document. "This came through this morning, Marshal, direct from the territorial governor. All pursuit of Kael is suspended pending investigation into Colonel Miller's death." Thorn's face went purple with rage. "You lying piece of—" "Check your own dispatch pouch," Bradley interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm, "unless you've been too busy collecting bounties to read your official mail." The Apache riders formed a wide circle around the ranch, not threatening, but unmistakably present. Their chief dismounted and walked slowly toward the well where his son waited. With each step, the old man's eyes never left Kael's face, searching for signs of serious injury. When father and son embraced, a collective sigh seemed to rise from the assembled warriors. Elias found himself witnessing something sacred, the reunion of a leader with his people, a father with his child, a peace negotiator with those he'd sworn to protect. The chief spoke to his son in rapid Apache, his weathered hands checking the wound, his face grave with concern. Kael responded in the same language, but Elias caught enough English mixed in to understand the gist, the truth, the conspiracy, the names of the real killers. When the conversation ended, the chief turned to face Thorn with eyes like black diamonds. When he spoke, his English was perfect and precise. "Marshal Thorn, my son tells me you came here to murder him." Thorn's pistol wavered. "I came here to arrest a fugitive from your own corruption. A man whose only crime was discovering how you and your friends have been profiting from war between our peoples." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Thorn's remaining ally Hawkins was slowly backing his horse away from the circle, clearly calculating his chances of escape. "You have no proof," Thorn said, but his voice cracked on the words. The chief smiled, not warmly, but with the grim satisfaction of a man holding all the cards. "We have Miller's letter. We have the testimony of the real killers who confessed everything before they died trying to escape our justice. And we have something else." He gestured to one of his warriors who rode forward carrying a leather satchel. From it, the warrior produced a stack of papers that made Thorn's face go ashen. "Your correspondence with the gunrunners," he continued. "Every payment, every shipment, every lie you told to cover your tracks. Miller was more thorough than you knew." Thorn's world collapsed in that moment. Elias watched a corrupt man realize that all his schemes, all his violence, all his betrayals had been for nothing. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses reliable, the justice inevitable. But cornered animals were unpredictable. Thorn swung his pistol toward the chief, desperation overriding common sense. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." What happened next moved faster than thought. Kael threw himself between the gun and his father, despite his wound. The pistol fired, and 50 Apache warriors reached for their weapons in perfect unison. But the shot went wild because Elias Vance, a simple rancher who just wanted to help a thirsty man, had tackled Marshal Thorne from behind, sending them both crashing to the ground in a tangle of dust and rage. The dust settled like a curtain falling on the final act of a play. Thorne lay motionless under Elias, his pistol thrown clear by the impact. Deputy Bradley and his men quickly secured both Thorne and Hawkins, while the Apache warriors slowly lowered their weapons. But it was what happened next that would stay with Elias for the rest of his life. The chief walked slowly to where Elias sat, catching his breath in the dirt. The old man's weathered face showed no expression as he studied this white rancher who had risked everything for a stranger. Then, without warning, he placed both hands on Elias's shoulders and spoke in Apache words that carried the weight of ceremony, of honor, of recognition. Cale translated, his voice thick with emotion. He says, "You are now brother to our people. What you did today, showing mercy to an enemy, risking your life for truth, choosing courage over fear, these are the actions of a true warrior." Elias felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening to let in light he'd never seen before. All his life he'd been taught that Indians were savages, enemies, obstacles to civilization. But looking into the chief's ancient eyes, he saw only wisdom, dignity, and a kind of respect he'd never earned from his own people. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Elias had ever witnessed. The Apache warriors dismounted and formed a circle around him. One by one they approached and touched his hand, not a handshake in the white man's fashion, but something deeper, a recognition of kinship that transcended skin color or culture. When the last warrior had paid his respects, the chief presented Elias with a gift that took his breath away. A war lance decorated with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork, its shaft worn smooth by generations of hands. "This belonged to my grandfather, and his grandfather before him. It has never been carried by anyone not born Apache, until today." As the sun set over the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Apache prepared to depart. Cale's wound had been properly treated by the tribal medicine man, and though he was still weak, he would live to see the peace treaty expanded and the real conspirators brought to justice. Before mounting his horse, Cale clasped Elias's hand one final time. "You saved more than my life today, brother. You saved the peace between our peoples." "I just gave a thirsty man some water," Elias replied, a small smile touching his lips. "Sometimes," Cale smiled back, "that's how the world changes. One cup of water at a time."
24 hours later, exactly as the title had promised, they were gone. But they left behind something precious, proof that in a world full of hatred and fear, simple human decency could still work miracles. Thorne and Hawkins were tried and convicted of treason, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder. The gun-running operation was dismantled, and the peace treaty was not only renewed, but expanded to include all the tribes of the territory. And Elias Vance, a simple rancher who had shown mercy to a stranger, became the first white man in territorial history to be formally adopted into the Apache Nation. Because sometimes, in the brutal landscape of the Old West, the greatest battles weren't won with guns or violence, but with something far more powerful: the courage to see enemies as human beings and the wisdom to choose compassion over fear.